Welcome to another episode of Blacks Only. That's right, Blacks Only. The only show in South Africa that makes fun of society's obsession with identity, things like race and gender and all that nonsense, which actually says very little about us. And what says a lot more about us is intellectual diversity. That's where diversity matters most, actual intellectual diversity. So yes, you will have only black individuals on the panel, but we're all different. We run a gauntlet of ideas and worldviews, from liberals to moderates and centrists to classical liberals, libertarians, and hey, the resident anarchist on the show, Mpiyakhe Dhlamini, who we actually have with us today. Remember, you can find my sister show on this channel called The Big Liberty Show itself. That is the flagship show every Wednesday at 4 p.m. And of course, Blacks Only comes to you on a Monday at 4. Guys, thank you so much and welcome. I have a new face. I'm hoping you guys have spotted that. And he's looking really nervous. I hope not. You are home. This is where we discuss ideas freely as South Africans. Let me actually welcome my guest closest to me because he's a regular in the house. Mpiyakhe, welcome back. How are you doing?
Thank you for having me back here.
Fantastic.
Apparently, I didn't mess things up too badly last time. So,
hey man, I was about to say we sort of just concluded, of course, that Efton didn't kill himself, but who knows? Maybe he might come back alive. Who knows? But we do have a new face, and I must say thank you very much to Jimmy Ramakgopa. Jimmy, of course, is the host of the Politricks podcast, one which I'm hoping you guys are watching. It does lots of short videos, very nice content on social media. Please go and subscribe to Politricks. Nice name too. Jimmy, hello, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for the invite. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us. Now, guys, let's hop straight into this week's topics. And, the first one, of course, is Jimmy himself. And I'm glad it's Jimmy, and that you're not going to be like, hey, man, don't call me by my slave name. Like a certain other Jimmy, Mzwanele, on social media. Jimmy, who are we talking to? Where are you from? Tell us a bit about yourself.
Oh, okay. Jimmy Ramakgopa, basically by profession. I'm actually a civil engineer by profession.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm in the construction sector, and I do on the side Politricks SA. It's more like a passion project, really. Mm-hmm. I've always had an interest in media. I used to work for one of the big media companies in South Africa. Mm-hmm. When I was 18, I was actually doing cartoons for them. And I sort of left media a bit and went into civil engineering, into construction. And I thought, you know what, this is where my passion lies, and I should do a little bit more of it. I'm also very passionate about politics, particularly in activism. In my time in university, I was a student activist, but my focus was more on disabilities. But I've also sat in university forums such as the university forum. I actually studied at Wits University. Student Services Advisory Committee, Student Security Advisory Committee. So I've been sort of involved in leadership roles, you understand? Because that's where my passion lies.
Absolutely, and I can definitely hear it. But I suppose the question everybody's chomping at the bit to find out on is, I often introduce the show as having a veritable mix of individuals with different worldviews. So, Jimmy, how would you describe your worldview? Are you a liberal, a communist, or a socialist? How would you describe yourself if you were to pin yourself or you pin your colors to the mast?
To be quite honest, the best way for me to describe myself is as a centrist. Mm-hmm. Because there are certain elements of, I'd like to say, neoliberalism that I agree with. For example, I participate in some of the activities with the Friedrich Naumann Foundation.
Shout out to the FMF,
Yeah. So I've entered some contests with them. I'm finalist with one of their contests.
Oh, well done.
Yeah, so, but because there are certain things related to liberalism that I agree with.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, there are certain things that are echoed by the socialists that I agree with.
Ooh, all right.
Yeah. In my world, it's not binary. It's not you're not either liberal or socialist, or you're not either left or either right, because South Africa is a bit more complex than that, in my opinion. And so, to me, centrism makes more sense for the South African context.
All right, and we welcome you to the show. I think we really do, and encourage anybody else with divergent and different views, come onto the show. I mean, it's meant to be this. As we look at various hot topics of the week through various lenses, that's actually what we want on the show. Yeah. So, Jimmy, welcome to the show. Please feel at home. This will be your second home away from Politricks. So we welcome you to it. Guys,
thank you.
Let's hop straight into the topic for the week, or the topics, for the week. The first one, I suppose the one on everybody's tongue, Mayor Herman Mashaba. He has just stepped down. He stepped down this week, to much fanfare, of course. And a lot of, accusations of this and, that, et cetera, et cetera. But there's two things I want to look at here. It's his resignation itself and some of the reasoning behind it. And more broadly, the tiff, if I can call it that you and I had on social media.
A disagreement.
So came and trying to tiff, the disagreement that we had on social media where, I set about a case and I provided evidence that the Herman Mashaba that we are seeing play out on social media, the megalomaniac, the egomaniac, if you will, who essentially has become a bit of a race baiter. I mean, here's a guy who, and there's quite a few cases of it now, where ordinary citizens who happen to be white, if they bring an issue to him, he will racialize it. I mean, one of them was, I just can't think of a name right now, who basically took a picture of a storm drain that was essentially broken in half, and the one side was protruding, and she makes the innocuous comment to say, look, this thing's been broken for a few years now, can we please get the mayor, she tags him, of course, and the city to deal with this, because it's posing a danger to school kids and the like. And his response, whilst he was in Denmark, if memory serves me right, was somewhere along the lines of, oh, it's funny that the beneficiaries of apartheid are, making a meal of this and blah, blah, blah. And everybody, I mean, even people who are staunch supporters of him kind of went, yeah, dude, what's up with that? Like, what does that have to do with anything other than what this lady is trying to say? And more recently, a colleague of ours here at the Institute of Race Relations, Herman Pretorius, basically made the point to say, you've become this individual who a lot of us who've known you for a while don't recognize anymore. And we kind of are not entirely sure what that really means. Are you still the capitalist crusader, the non-racialist individual that we came to love and you inspired, by the way, a lot of us? Mpiyakhe, I'm actually going to begin with you because I think you, with the organization that you're with, have how do I put it? I mean, he was once the chairperson of the Free Market Foundation. Is this Herman the Herman of that time?
Yeah. No, I wasn't there when he was at the Free Market Foundation, but Herman Mashaba actually played a crucial role in my, I suppose, on my road to Damascus when I became a libertarian and, when I first discovered this ideology or this philosophy. Because before Herman Mashaba and also one other person here, Phumlani Majosi, before them, I was not aware of any South African liberal or libertarian. I just thought, okay, I'm the only libertarian here in this country. Oh my God, what am I going to do? And then I started reading like Phumlani's articles. Yes. I read about Herman Mashaba, the things he was saying when, I think it was around about the time when his book came out, The Capitalist Crusader. And then I was reading the things he was saying and like, it was like, oh wow, I agree with all of this. And like it was just so, it helped keep me on the road as well. It's like, okay, this guy believes in a lot of the things I believe in. We seem to share the same values, believe in a lot of the same things. So I guess like I'm not crazy. I mean, I'm crazy. I guess this makes sense because if someone like him who I really respect, who I respected throughout my life because, as the founder of Black Like Me, I
That's
mean,
right.
like, it was, I think at some point in my home, I have 3 sisters. At some point, Black Like Me was the only hair brand that was allowed to be in the house.
Hey man, that's Dr. Shelf, didn't it?
Yeah.
Burn his cups.
No, so it's someone I've always respected, and it was just so disappointing to see how he turned from what I knew of him back then to what he has become now. It's just disappointing. Yeah.
I'm going to bring you in, Jimmy, because I'm not entirely sure where we disagreed on this, to be honest, because we sort of ended our tweet threads as basically saying, oh, hang on, we kind of agree, but we're just not phrasing it in the same way. where am I wrong? Do you agree with Herman that the Herman that we knew back then, according to him, is someone we had a wrong image of Herman, as he puts it? We didn't know the Herman of back then.
Okay, I think where we disagreed, was on the importance of race, right? Because our discussion sort of like turned into something else.
Yeah. As it does on social media.
Yeah. So where we disagreed was on race. But on other principles, like when we consider like freedom principles, when you consider like liberty, I don't think we disagree too much there. However, talking about Herman specifically, I think also that he has changed, but I don't necessarily disagree with him. Understand? I don't necessarily think that his change is all that bad, understand? Because one would argue that when you are in a particular organization, for example, the Democratic Alliance, you are sort of like subject to the particular principles that are being pushed by that particular organization, understand? So perhaps Herman hasn't changed, but perhaps he was sort of like reiterating what his organizations stand for, like with the Free Markets Foundation, with the Democratic Alliance. I think I'm just
all right. I'm going to bring you in, Mpiyakhe, there, but I don't know about that, because I think for a lot of people there was an immediate alarm bell when, remember, the DA's rhetoric is one South Africa for all, they're a non-racial party, etc., etc. And a lot of people started asking questions then, why is a mayor insisting on segmenting who criticizes him based on race and judging the criticizer based on their melanin, if you will, versus the merit of the criticism? So for instance, when you have this gaggle of people online who praise him and say, oh, this is our mayor, especially the EFF types, who even do little memes of him wearing a red beret, there's no issue there for him. And again, I'm not saying, I'm sort of conflating issues here. Let me go back to the central issue. If you're going to stand on the hill of non-racialism and you argue that you want to treat people as individuals, as Herman has actually said historically, there's a video clip I shared where he does that. He says, view people as individuals. When you do that, everybody benefits. How is that person the same to the mayor version of Herman, who basically makes who bites back, if you will, at a citizen based on race? So if you're white, apparently you are inherently racist. There is an apartheid beneficiary in you. That is the motive of you criticizing Herman. Before I come back to you, Jimmy, Mpiyakhe, your view?
So I was going to disagree, Jimmy, in a friendly way, in the sense that Herman, for example, when he was at the Free Market Foundation, there was no obligation on him to say whatever the Free Market Foundation wants him to say. Yeah. It was not a paid position; it was a volunteer position. So, which means that basically he decided to become to become a member. And then he decided to subscribe to the foundation, to pay a fee, a membership fee, and then the board eventually, or the membership elected him to the board, and then he was elected chairman and an unpaid position. So he was under no obligation to say whatever. He chose to associate with these people with a certain set of values. It was his choice that he made, and he was not being paid for it. And then even one quote from Helen Zille was that when they recruited him to become the mayor candidate in Johannesburg, he said that Herman was actually more, as she would call it, more right-wing than him, because at the time she said, according to her, Herman didn't believe in welfare, for example. He believed that you just
Boy, do we remember that.
Exactly. So to the fact that you have all of these stories and other people who have known him much longer than any of us since we are young, all of us. So not much longer than any of us will tell you that this guy has been always a strident, strong, free marketeer, liberal. So there was something that happened when he became mayor that had not happened before in his life. But to say he didn't change, it would be untrue. He has changed.
Jimmy, let me make one more point, and I'm going to use Herman's words himself. There's a video of Herman that I shared where he basically goes through, he had just finished publisher of the book Capitalist Crusader, and he was being interviewed by some lady, and she asks him to set out his vision from the book, right? And he himself says it, that he's tired of politicians who view people through the prism of race, and what he would rather want to see is policy that targets the individual, policy that empowers, actually were his words, the individual and the market being used as a means of doing that, because once you do that, invariably you will target the very people who should be benefiting from that, and the vast majority of them. In fact, his words were, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but something along the lines of, but by extension, you will target the majority who happen to suffer from poverty and the social ills, i.e. black individuals. That is textbook, the argument that organizations like the Institute of Race Relations would make, or the Free Market Foundation, or even any of us, or let me not speak for you in particular, I'll let you have your own say, but something that perhaps Mpiyakhe and I would say. So let's then broaden it out to the discussion on race itself. How is that view, as articulated by someone even like Herman, old Herman, and us, that basically says if you target the individual and your sole focus is making sure that the individual in this country is well catered for, has all the opportunities that they can pursue, and is actually living a free life where we remove stumbling blocks from their pathway, how do black people suddenly not benefit from that?
Perhaps Herman got into government and realized that it's actually fallacious. Perhaps. Yeah? I'm not saying it is.
No.
But perhaps he actually thought textbook logic and actually put it into practice and saw that it's actually not the case, Because when you look at poor people, the argument that if you sort of like have the right things in place, poor people will automatically become at the same level as those who are currently at a high level. When you make such an argument, you understand, that's where I start questioning it.
Okay.
Because what does that imply? The first thing that implies is that it implies that poor people who are majority black happen to be poor. It's sort of like they just happen to be poor. They're poor because they're poor. It doesn't recognize the fact that black people were systematically placed in a position to be poor in their majority. You know what I'm saying? Because if you neglect a deliberate solution for emancipating black people out of poverty, if you ignore that there has to be a deliberate solution, in other words, you're saying that there was never a deliberate effort to place them in that position, you see. So my argument is that if we are going to recognize race, for example, and say that race matters, and if you're going to acknowledge that black people were placed in a particular situation, right, but not do anything about it, you see, not address that particular situation directly, then I think we have a problem. You see what I mean?
Let me ask questions.
Yeah.
I want to ask you questions.
Yeah.
Does providing a quality education that meets international standards, that allows an individual child to be able to pursue any career that they are able to meet up to, does that address partially the systematic injustices of the past? Well, one of them, which was, by the way, the provision of a bad or poor quality education, i.e. Bantu education. So does addressing education, is that one element that improves the lot of poor black individuals?
Look, it is an element, but if we ask ourselves, if we agree that white people are in majority at the helm of the economy, right? Are we honest in ourselves in saying that white people are at the helm of the economy because they are more educated than black people? One would disagree, because if you look at the statistics and you look at the number of educated people with tertiary education, it shows that there are actually more black people with in terms of numbers. I know this is a bit skewed. When you talk about numbers and you talk about proportionality, it becomes a bit funny. But the fact that high majority of black people who have a tertiary education aren't necessarily scraping the real economy means that there's something more to it. I'm not saying that education isn't a factor. It is a factor. I understand.
I want us to be clear and speak in clear terms, and I'll bring you in just now, Mpiyakhe. But I want us to get to the nub of this, because I don't want us to evade direct questions. Is there a difference in South Africa today between a tertiary educated university holding black South African versus a black South African who doesn't have a university degree or barely even finished grade 12? Yes or no? Is there a difference between those two people?
Of course.
Is there are those two individuals, if you will, unequal?
They can be.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So we're therefore agreeing that education, therefore, it must stand. That education, the provision of a quality education, is critically important in lifting whether that individual is black or white. An individual who's poor, out of poverty, can we agree on that?
Out of
poverty. Yeah, like a solid education.
Yeah, of course, yes.
Because the data reflects this, by the way.
Yeah, no, of
If
course.
you look at the percentage of people who are unemployed who have a degree versus the percentage of people who are unemployed who don't have degrees, it's chalk and cheese. Like this is the data itself. And this is where I'm partially coming in, and I'll bring you in back. Sorry, but I wanted to get to this nub because this was the point of our disagreement. Because remember, our argument isn't that, you're going to create equality necessarily by certain policies between whites and blacks, by just instituting certain policies. We're not aiming for equality in the here and now because you can't achieve that. And if you're viewing that is the equality of outcomes, because the outcomes you can't essentially reach in an instantaneous type policy direction. What you can do is make sure that the opportunities, in other words, what is provided to those who are at the lower ends of society, are equal. So when we talk about a quality education, a white child who goes to St. Stithians versus a white child who goes to Kaliga High School in Mlazi, if you provide the same high quality of education for those two children, their race inevitably becomes irrelevant, because suddenly it now comes down to the knowledge, the skills, the abilities, the talents of that young person in utilizing that quality education for them to pursue their opportunities.
Yeah.
Would you disagree with that before I bring Mpiyakhe in?
I'll disagree with that partially.
Okay.
Based on the fact that I'm talking from experience, looking at the MDs.
Well, we're also black. We have experience in that regard.
Yeah, but what I'm saying, I'm looking at the MDs. I'm looking at the white MDs.
Yes.
I'm looking at the white business owners. I'm looking at the white farmers. Very few of them have tertiary education, right? Very few of them are educated to even start with. So what the apartheid government did well is that it developed white Afrikaner industrialists, right? And that's where the real economy is, right? That's a fact, right? And that's why the white community is able to sustain itself, right? Because they were well developed to become that way. If your father owns a business, chances are you're going to inherit that business. Chances are you're going to learn from your father and start your own businesses. Understand? So white people aren't at the helm of the economy because they're educated or they're more intelligent or whatever.
All right.
They're there because they were deliberately developed to own the economy.
I want to disagree slightly, but I want to bring Mpiyakhe in because the data disagrees with you on that. You saw the most rapid rise in the number of white individuals who own businesses actually post 1994. And one of the reasons for that, if you look at the data, this is Stats SA data, if you don't believe me. One of the reasons for that was ever increasingly white South Africans were being pushed out of what was traditionally reserved jobs for them in the state, often in SOEs, et cetera, et cetera. And what you saw happen, because they were skilled, is that they then moved into the private sector, started businesses in order to sustain themselves. That's actually what the data says. But I want to bring Mpiyakhe in on this one. Mpiyakhe?
Yeah, so I actually agree with you that the apartheid government systematically targeted black people. But what you have to understand at the end of the day, even though the apartheid government of Verwoerd might say, okay, I'm going to pull every black man down, I'm going to put them under my boots, I'm going to squeeze every black person. How that comes out, it comes out as an injustice against the individuals who are black, but it comes also against the... So when you say that, when you champion race-based redress, what you must understand is that from a liberal perspective, that is unacceptable, because it will undermine our whole conception of the rule of law and what justice is. Because what it does, it says that whereas in the rule of law, as we classically conceive it as liberals, you would only consider the effects of the case, like an injustice happened to you, you had your land taken away from you, and so what does the law need to do in order to restore you to the position you were in before? But now what you end up doing with race is that you know the facts of the case, that there's been an injustice against this individual, but then you don't prioritize those facts. You say, okay, you look at subjective things like, okay, are you black? Okay, yeah, let's give you a job there, or maybe let's make you a shareholder in this company. So what ends up happening, unfortunately, but then people who were not victims, and there are black people who are not victims of apartheid. For example, if I moved to South Africa in 1994 as a black person from Zimbabwe, let's say, and then I just happened to get citizenship after 5 years or however long it is, then am I a victim of apartheid as well? Those are the kinds of questions that, so in the interest of justice, you should always look at the facts of the particular case as they relate to the individuals involved, and as to who was wronged by a particular legislation. Let's not even call it law, because in the liberal conception, law means something specific. So if someone has been wronged by legislation, then you fix that problem, you restore that individual to where they should have been if they had not been robbed. So even you look at other things, education is not the only thing. Like for example, okay, let's look at my field, for example. The differentials between the pay that is earned by programmers who are white and who are black, if you look at those things, you find other factors. Like you look at things that are hard to measure, like people have been coding, like for example, let's say the white individual has been coding since they were 8 years old. So even though you might have gone to the same university, but this individual is much better at building software because they're just much more experienced. Things that count, like for example, if it takes you, even though I went to university, I got my computer science degree, I have an 80%, but I'll just not be as fast. I won't be thinking through problems as quickly, through looking through systems in the same way as someone who has been coding since they were 8. And so all of these things accumulate. And one of the things I actually found in my research, which was also produced by Stats SA, something called the Living Conditions Survey. If you look at poverty in South Africa and where it is concentrated, it is exactly in the areas where communal land dominates. And so this is I would say, from what I've seen, this is the biggest generator of poverty in South Africa. The very existence of communal land, tribal communal land, which denies people of property rights, and which incidentally also explains things like why don't you have more black industrialists? Well, who's going to build industry in an area where you can just have it taken away from you tomorrow by some chief who doesn't like you? And so all of these things, they matter. And so you should sort of see the injustices which have to be restituted, like individuals have to be restored, like what was taken away from them, how they were wronged, that has to be restored to them, and how they were wronged. But also look at present injustice. So if we keep on focusing on race-based injustice, we miss present injustice. There's millions of people in rural KZN who are experiencing present-day injustice. Absolutely. And so if we say it's only white people who can oppress the black individuals, then we will miss the injustice continues to go on in South Africa. The regulations, for example, let's impose costs on black people when they want to start businesses. You will miss things like that because you will just say, oh, we don't have any race-based legislation, and then miss the fact that there are other things that were used by apartheid to oppress people, like regulations, and then are still used by this government to oppress people, but you will miss them because you'll only be looking at race.
Fellas, I must wrap the conversation up. I feel bad even saying that, because I'm sure there's just going, what? No, but they're doing it right now. Yeah. Guys, I must wrap the conversation up here. But as I said, Jimmy, I'm hoping we'll have you back on more and more, because these are issues I think we must discuss. Because I think the central issue here becomes, I don't think there's broad disagreement. I just think it's the approach. Yeah. I think Mpiyakhe and I would advocate that you've got to view people as individuals so that you can target the actual impediments to an individual's life that prevents them from accessing opportunity, from prospering. And you can't therefore use a blanket, or not even a blanket, you can't just sort of brush over with one metric or a couple of metrics such as race or gender, because you miss certain nuances in that approach. But and I do get the outcomes argument, right? Of course, everybody wants an outcome where everybody is quote unquote equal, though I'm not a fan of equality. The point I think you're making more is that everybody has an equal opportunity on the other side, if you will, to be prosperous, to live a middle class existence, etc., etc. I don't think we're far away from each other in that regard, but I must end the conversation here. But we'll welcome this debate on other areas too in other episodes of the show. Guys, thank you very much. Maybe in the last 20 seconds, as I always do, how do people find you on social media, Jimmy? What are your handles?
Okay, the personal handle is at Jimmy Ramakgopa. Yeah.
I'll put it on the screen, don't worry.
All social networks. And then for my page is at Politricks SA.
Excellent. And I really encourage you guys to check that stuff out. It's really, really well produced. Mpiyakhe, how do we find you?
So my personal website is mpiyakhe.dhlamini.com. You can find all the content I produce there. And then on Twitter, you can find me at touring_1991. On Facebook, it's just Mpiyakhe Dhlamini.
Awesome. Guys, thank you very much. I really appreciate this, and I'm hoping we'll have another episode on the Blacks Only. That's what happens when you have multiple shows. And thank you, dear viewer, for joining us on this episode of Blacks Only. Remember, we strive to invite as many different individuals, people who think differently onto the show. So if you're watching this and hopefully Jimmy gave you some courage, some Dutch courage to come on, hey, come on to the show. I mean, no one's going to bite your head off. We have a frank and, peaceful conversation. There won't be any, Uncle Tomeries and anything flying around here in the way of insults. But we do encourage thinkers, people who actually have views and are willing to debate them, to come onto this show so that we can have that conversation. Thank you so much for watching this episode. I will link everybody's details on the bottom of the screen. And remember, never trust a commie.